The Black Sheep by L. Frank Baum. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Black sheep, have you any wool? Yes, my little master, 3 bags full. 1 for my master, and 1 for his dame, and 1 for the little boy that lives in the lane. It was a bright spring day, and the sun shone very warm and pleasant over the pastures, where the new grass was growing so juicy and tender that all the sheep thought they had never tasted anything so delicious. The sheep had had a strange experience that morning, for the farmer had taken them down to the brook and washed them, and then he tied their legs together and laid them on the grass and clipped all the heavy, soft wool from their bodies with a great pair of shears. The sheep did not like this very well, for every once in a while the shears would pull the wool and hurt them. And when they were sheared, they felt very strange, for it was almost as if someone took off all your clothes and let you run around naked. None of them were in a very good temper this morning, although the sun shone so warmly and the grass was so sweet. And as they watched the farmer and his man carry the wool up to the house in great bags, the old ram said crossly, "I hope they are satisfied now that they have stolen from us all our soft, warm fleece." "What are they going to do with it?" asked one of the sheep. "Oh, they will spin it into threads and make coats for the men and dresses for the women, for men are such strange creatures that no wool grows on them at all, and that is why they selfishly rob us of our fleece, that they may cover their own skinny bodies." "It must be horrid to be a man," said the black sheep, "and not to have any wool grow on you at all. I'm sorry for that little boy that lives in the lane, for he will never be able to keep warm unless we give him some of our wool." "But what a shame it is," continued the ram, "for the farmer to steal all the wool from us when we have taken all the trouble to grow it." "I don't mind," bleated a young lamb named Frisky as it kicked up its heels and gamboled about upon the grass. "It's nice to have all that heavy wool cut off my back, for I shan't have to carry it around wherever I go." "Oh, indeed," sneered the ram. "You like it, do you? Have you any idea what you look like, all sheared down to your skin? How would you like to have someone come along and see you, now that you are all head and legs?" "Oh, I wouldn't mind," said the lamb again. "I shall grow more wool by winter time, and I'm sure I don't look any worse than you do." Some of the sheep looked at the ram and began to titter, for he was old and thin and looked very comical indeed without any wool. And this made him so angry that he went off by himself and began eating grass and would not speak to the others at all. "I don't know why sheep should feel badly about having their fleeces cut," remarked the black sheep thoughtfully, "for the farmer is very kind to us, and so is his dame, and I am glad my wool serves to keep them warm in the winter, for before the snow comes our wool will grow out again, and we shall not be any the worse for our loss." "I don't know why sheep should feel badly about having their fleeces cut," remarked the black sheep thoughtfully, "for the farmer is very kind to us, and so is his dame, and I am glad my wool serves to keep them warm in the winter, for before the snow comes our wool will grow out again, and we shall not be any the worse for our loss." "What do people who haven't any sheep do for clothes?" asked the lamb. "I'm sure I don't know. They must nearly freeze in the winter. Perhaps the ram can tell us." But the ram was still angry and refused to say anything, so the sheep stopped talking and began to scatter over the pasture and eat the tender new grass. By and by the black sheep wandered near the lane, and looking up, saw the little boy watching it through the bars. "Good morning, black sheep," said the boy. "Why do you look so funny this morning?" "They have cut off my wool," answered the sheep. "What will they do with it, black sheep?" inquired the little boy. "They will make coats of it to keep themselves warm." "I wish I had some wool," said the boy, "for I need a new coat very badly, and mamma is so poor she cannot buy me one." "That is too bad," replied the black sheep, "but I shall have more wool by and by, and then I will give you a bagful to make a new coat from." "Will you really?" asked the boy, looking very much pleased. "Indeed I will," answered the sheep, "for you are always kind and have a pleasant word for me, so you watch until my wool grows again, and then you shall have your share of it." "Oh, thank you," said the boy, and he ran away to tell his mother what the black sheep had said. When the farmer came into the field again, the black sheep said to him, "Master, how many bags of wool did you cut from my back?" "2 bags full," replied the farmer, "and it was very nice wool indeed." "If I grow 3 bags full the next time, may I have 1 bag for myself?" asked the sheep. "Why, what could you do with a bag of wool?" questioned the farmer. "I want to give it to the little boy that lives in the lane. He is very poor and needs a new coat." "Very well," answered the master. "If you can grow 3 bags full, I will give one to the little boy." So the black sheep began to grow wool and tried in every way to grow the finest and heaviest fleece in all the flock. She always lay in the sunniest part of the pastures and drank from the clearest part of the brook and ate only the young and juicy shoots of grass and the tenderest of the sheep sorrel. And every day the little boy came to the bars and looked at the sheep and inquired how the wool was growing. "I am getting along finely," the black sheep would answer, "for not one sheep in the pasture has so much wool as I have grown already." "Can I do anything to help you?" asked the little boy. "Not that I can think of," replied the sheep, "unless you could get me a little salt. I believe salt helps the wool to grow." So the boy ran to the house and begged his mother for a handful of salt. And then he came back to the bars where the black sheep licked it out of his hand. Day by day the wool on the sheep grew longer and longer, and even the old ram noticed it and said, "You are foolish to grow so much wool, for the farmer will cut it all off, and it will do you no good. Now I am growing just as little as possible, for since he steals what I have, I am determined he shall get very little wool from my back." Black Sheep did not reply to this, for she thought the old ram very ill-tempered and selfish, and believed he was doing wrong not to grow more wool. Finally the time came to shear the sheep again, and the farmer and his man came into the pasture to look at them, and were surprised to see what a fine big fleece the black sheep had grown. "There will be 3 bags full at the least," said the master, "and I will keep my promise and give one to the little boy in the lane. But my goodness, how scraggly and poor the old ram looks! There is scarcely any wool on him at all. I think I must sell him to the butcher." And in truth, although the ram kicked and struggled and bleated with rage, they tied his legs and put him into the cart and carried him away to the butcher. And that was the last the sheep ever saw of him. But the black sheep ran up to the bars by the lane and waited with a glad heart till the little boy came. When he saw the sheep waiting for him, he asked, Black sheep, have you any wool?" And the sheep replied, "Yes, my little master, 3 bags full." "That is fine," said the boy, "but who are the 3 bags for?" "One for my master, one for his dame, and one for the little boy that lives in the lane." "Thank you, Black Sheep," said the little boy. "You are very kind, and I shall always think of you when I wear my new coat." The next day the sheep were all sheared, and the black sheep's fleece made 3 big bags full. The farmer kept his promise and carried 1 bag to the little boy that lived in the lane, and the wool was so soft and so heavy that there was enough not only for the new coat, but to make his mother a warm dress as well. The black sheep was very proud and happy when the mother and her little boy came down to the bars and showed the new clothes that had been made from the wool. "This pays me for all my trouble," said the black sheep, and the little boy reached his hand through the bars and patted her gently upon the head. End of The Black Sheep by L. Frank Baum.
The Boy and the Wolves, or The Broken Promise, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Boy and the Wolves, or The Broken Promise, a North American Indian story. Once upon a time, an Indian hunter built himself a house in the middle of a great forest, far away from all his tribe, for his heart was gentle and kind, and he was weary of the treachery and cruel deeds of those who had been his friends. So he left them, and took his wife and 3 children, and they journeyed on until they found a spot near to a clear stream, where they began to cut down trees and to make ready their wigwam. For many years they lived peacefully and happily in this sheltered place, never leaving it except to hunt the wild animals, which served them both for food and clothes. At last, however, the strong man felt sick, and before long he knew he must die. So he gathered his family around him, and said his last words to them. "You, my wife, the companion of my days, will follow me ere many moons have waned to the island of the blessed. But for you, O my children, whose lives are but newly begun, the wickedness, unkindness, and ingratitude from which I fled are before you. Yet I shall go hence in peace, my children, if you will promise always to love each other, and never to forsake your youngest brother." "Never," they replied, holding out their hands, and the hunter died content. Scarcely 8 moons had passed when, just as he had said, the wife went forth and followed her husband, but before leaving her children she bade the 2 elder ones think of their promise never to forsake the younger, for he was a child and weak. And while the snow lay thick upon the ground, they tended him and cherished him, but when the earth showed green again, the heart of the young man stirred within him, and he longed to see the wigwams of the village where his father's youth was spent. Therefore he opened all his heart to his sister, who answered, "My brother, I understand your longing for our fellow men, whom here we cannot see. But remember our father's words. Shall we not seek our own pleasures and forget the little one?" But he would not listen, and making no reply, he took his bow and arrows and left the hut. The snows fell and melted, yet he never returned, and at last the heart of the girl grew cold and hard, and her little boy became a burden in her eyes, till one day she spoke thus to him, "See, there is food for many days to come. Stay here within the shelter of the hut. I go to seek our brother, and when I have found him, I shall return hither." But when, after hard journeying, she reached the village where her brother dwelt, and saw that he had a wife and was happy, and when she too was sought by a young brave, then she also forgot the boy alone in the forest, and thought only of her husband. Now as soon as the little boy had eaten all the food which his sister had left him, he went out into the woods, and gathered berries and dug up roots, and while the sun shone he was contented and had his fill. But when the snows began and the wind howled, then his stomach felt empty and his limbs cold, and he hid in trees all the night, and only crept out to eat what the wolves had left behind. And by, having no other friends, he sought their company, and sat by while they devoured their prey, and they grew to know him, and gave him food. And without them he would have died in the snow. But at last the snows melted, and the ice upon the great lake, and as the wolves went down to the shore, the boy went after them. And it happened one day that his big brother was fishing in his canoe near the shore, and he heard the voice of a child singing in the Indian tone, my brother, I am becoming a wolf, I am becoming a wolf." And when he had so sung, he howled as wolves howl, "Woo, woo, woo!" Then the heart of the elder sunk, and he hastened towards him, crying, "Brother, little brother, come to me!" But he, being half a wolf, only continued his song. And the louder the elder called to him, "Brother, little brother, come to me!" The swifter he fled after his brothers the wolves, and the heavier grew his skin, till with a long howl, "Woo!" he vanished into the depths of the forest. So, with shame and anguish in his soul, the elder brother went back to his village, and with his sister mourned the little boy and the broken promise till the end of his life. End of The Boy and the Wolves. This recording is in the public domain.
Connla and the Fairy Maiden. Edited by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org.
Connla of the Fiery Hair was son of Conn of the 100 Fates. One day, as he stood by the side of his father on the height of Usna, he saw a maiden clad in strange attire coming towards him. "Whence comest thou, maiden?" said Connla. "I come from the plains of the ever-living," she said. "There where there is neither death nor sin. There we keep holiday alway, nor need we help from any in our joy. And in all our pleasure we have no strife, and because we have our homes in the round green hills, men call us the hill folk." The king and all with him wondered much to hear a voice when they saw no one, for save Connla alone, none saw the fairy maiden. "To whom art thou talking, my son?" said Conn the king. Then the maiden answered, "Connla speaks to a young fair maid whom neither death nor old age awaits. I love Connla, and now I call him away to the plain of pleasure, mleigh, where Bodag is king for aye, nor has there been complaint or sorrow in that land since he has held the kingship. Oh, come with me, Connla of the Fiery Hair, ruddy as the dawn with thy tawny skin. A fairy crown awaits thee to grace thy comely face and royal form. Come, and never shall thy comeliness fade, nor thy youth, till the last awful day of judgment." The king, in fear at what the maiden said, which he heard though he could not see her, called aloud to his druid, Corin by name. "O Corin of the many spells," he said, "and of the cunning magic, I call upon thy aid. A task is upon me too great for all my skill and wit, greater than any laid upon me since I seized the kingship. A maiden unseen has met us, and by her power would take from me my dear, my comely son. If thou help not, He will be taken from thy king by women's wiles and witchery. Then Corin the Druid stood forth and chanted his spells towards the spot where the maiden's voice had been heard, and none heard her voice again, nor could Connla see her longer. Only as she vanished before the Druid's mighty spell, she threw an apple to Connla. For a whole month from that day, Connla would take nothing, either to eat or to drink, save only from that apple. But as he ate it, it grew again, and always kept whole, and all the while there grew within him a mighty yearning and longing after the maiden he had seen. But when the last day of the month of waiting came, Connla stood by the side of the king his father on the plain of Arcomin, and again he saw the maiden come towards him, and again she spoke to him. "'Tis a glorious place, forsooth, that Connla holds among short-lived mortals awaiting the day of death. But now the folk of life, the ever-living ones, beg and bid thee, come to Moymel, the plain of pleasure, for they have learnt to know thee, seeing thee in thy home among thy dear ones." When Conn the king heard the maiden's voice, he called to his men aloud and said, "Summon swift my druid Corin, for I see she has again this day the power of speech." Then the maiden said, "O mighty Conn, fighter of 100 fights, the druid's power is little loved. It has little honour in the mighty land, peopled with so many of the upright. When the law will come, it will do away with the druid's magic spells that come from the lips of the false black demon." Then Conn the king observed that since the maiden came, Connla his son spoke to none that spake to him. So Conn of the 100 Fights said to him, "Is it to thy mind what the woman says, my son?" "'Tis hard upon me," then said Connla. "I love my own folk above all things, but yet a longing seizes me for the maiden." When the maiden heard this, she answered and said, "The ocean is not so strong as the waves of thy longing. Come with me in my curragh, the gleaming, straight-gliding crystal canoe. Soon we can reach Bodag's realm. I see the bright sun sink, yet far as it is, we can reach it before dark. There is, too, another land worthy of thy journey, a land joyous to all that seek it. Only wives and maidens dwell there. If thou wilt, we can seek it, and live there alone together in joy." When the maiden ceased to speak, Connla of the fiery hair rushed away from them and sprang into the curragh, the gleaming, straight-gliding crystal canoe. And then they all, king and court, saw it glide away over the bright sea towards the setting sun. Away and away, till eye could see it no longer. And Connla and the fairy maiden went their way on the sea, and were no more seen, nor did any know where they came. End of Connla and the Fairy Maiden in Celtic Fairy Tales by Joseph Jacobs. Read by Elizabeth Rayner.
Earl Mar's Daughter, edited by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. One fine summer's day, Earl Mar's daughter went into the castle garden, dancing and tripping along, and as she played and sported, she would stop from time to time to listen to the music of the birds. After a while, as she sat under the shade of a green oak tree, she looked up and spied a sprightly dove sitting high up on one of its branches. She looked up and said, "Coo, my dove, my dear, come down to me, and I will give you a golden cage. I'll take you home and pet you well as any bird of them all." Scarcely had she said these words when the dove flew down from the branch and settled on her shoulder, nestling up against her neck, while she smoothed its feathers. Then she took it home to her own room. The day was done, and the night came on, and Earl Mar's daughter was thinking of going to sleep, when, turning round, she found at her side a handsome young man. She was startled, for the door had been locked for hours. But she was a brave girl, and said, "What are you doing here, young man, to come and startle me so?" The door was barred these hours ago. How ever did you come here?" "Hush, hush!" the young man whispered. "I was that cooing dove that you coaxed from off the tree." "But who are you then?" she said quite low, "and how came you to be changed into that dear little bird?" "My name is Florentine, and my mother is a queen, and something more than a queen, for she knows magic and spells, and because I would not do as she wished, she turned me into a dove by day, but at night her spells lose their power and I become a man again. Today I crossed the sea and saw you for the first time, and I was glad to be a bird that I could come near you. Unless you love me, I shall never be happy more." "But if I love you," says she, "will you not fly away and leave me one of these fine days?" "Never, never," said the prince. "Be my wife, and I'll be yours forever, by day a bird, by night a prince. I will always be by your side as a husband, dear." So they were married in secret, and lived happily in the castle, and no one knew that every night Coo my dove became Prince Florentine. And every year a little son came to them as bonny could be. But as each son was born, Prince Florentine carried the little thing away on his back over the sea to where the queen his mother lived, and left the little one with her. 7 years passed thus, and then a great trouble came to them, for the Earl Mar wished to marry his daughter to a noble of high degree who came wooing her. Her father pressed her sore, but she said, "Father dear, I do not wish to marry. I can be quite happy with Coo my dove here." Then her father got into a mighty rage and swore a great big oath and said, "Tomorrow, so sure as I live and eat, I'll twist that birdie's neck." And out he stamped from her room. "Oh, oh," said Coo my dove, "it's time that I was away." And so he jumped upon the window sill and in a moment was flying away, and he flew till he was over the deep, deep sea, and yet on he flew till he came to his mother's castle. Now the queen his mother was taking her walk abroad when she saw the pretty dove flying overhead and alighting on the castle walls. "Here, dancers, come and dance your jigs," she called. "And pipers, pipe you well, for here's my own Florentine, come back to me to stay, for he's brought no bonny boy with him this time." "No, mother," said Florentine, "no dancers for me, and no minstrels, for my dear wife, the mother of my 7 boys, is to be wed tomorrow, and sad is the day for me." "What can I do, my son?" said the queen. "Tell me, and it shall be done if my magic has power to do it." "Well then, mother dear, turn the 24 dancers and pipers into 24 grey herons, and let my 7 sons become 7 white swans, and let me be a goshawk and their leader." "Alas, alas, my son," she said, "that may not be, my magic reaches not so far. But perhaps my teacher, the spae wife of Austree, may know better." And away she hurries to the cave of Austree, and after a while comes out as white can be, and muttering over some burning herbs she brought out of the cave. Suddenly Coo my dove changed into a goshawk, and around him flew 24 grey herons, and above them flew 7 cygnets. Without a word or a good-bye, off they flew over the deep blue sea, which was tossing and moaning. They flew and they flew till they swooped down on Earl Mar's castle just as the wedding party were setting out for the church. First came the men-at-arms, and then the bridegroom's friends, and then Earl Mar's men, and then the bridegroom, and lastly, pale and beautiful, Earl Mar's daughter herself. They moved down slowly to stately music till they came past the trees on which the birds were settling. A word from Prince Florentine, the goshawk, and they all rose into the air, herons beneath, cygnets above, and goshawks circling above all. The weddineers wondered at the sight, when swoop! The herons were down among them, scattering the men-at-arms. The swanlets took charge of the bride, while the goshawk dashed down and tied the bridegroom to a tree. Then the herons gathered themselves together into one feather bed, and the cygnets placed their mother upon them, and suddenly they all rose into the air, bearing the bride away with them in safety towards Prince Florentine's home. Surely a wedding party was never so disturbed in this world. What could the weddineers do? They saw their pretty bride carried away and away, till she and the herons and the swans and the goshawk disappeared. And that very day Prince Florentine brought Earl Mar's daughter to the castle of the Queen, his mother, who took the spell off him, and they lived happily ever afterwards. End of Earl Mar's Daughter in English Fairy Tales, edited by Joseph Jacobs. Read by Elizabeth Rayner.
How Jack Went Out to Seek His Fortune by Arthur Rackham, retold by Flora Annie Steele. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once on a time, there was a boy named Jack, and one morning he started to go and seek his fortune. He didn't gone very far before he met a cat. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the cat. "I am going to seek my fortune." "May I go with you?" "Yes," said Jack. "The more the merrier." So on they went, Jack and the cat, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little further and they met a dog. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the dog. "I am going to seek my fortune." "May I go with you?" "Yes," said Jack. "The more the merrier." So they went, Jack, the cat, and the dog. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little further and they met a goat. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the goat. "I am going to seek my fortune." "May I go with you?" "Yes," said Jack. "The more the merrier." So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, and the goat. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little further and they met a bull. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the bull. "I am going to seek my fortune." "May I go with you?" "Yes," said Jack. "The more the merrier." So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, the goat, and the bull. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little further and they met a rooster. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the rooster. "I am going to seek my fortune." "May I go with you?" "Yes," said Jack. "The more the merrier." So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, the goat, the bull, and the rooster. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. And they went on jiggly jolting till it was about dark, and it was time to think of some place where they could spend the night. Now, after a bit, they came in sight of a house, and Jack told his companions to keep still while he went up and looked in through the window to see if all was safe. And what did he see through the window but a band of robbers seated at a table counting over great bags of gold. "That gold shall be mine," quoth Jack to himself. "I have found my fortune already." Then he went back and told his companions to wait till he gave the word, and then to make all the noise they possibly could in their own fashion. So when they were all ready, Jack gave the word, and the cat mewed, and the dog barked, and the goat bleated, and the bull bellowed, and the rooster crowed, and all together they made such a terrific hubbub that the robbers jumped up in a fright and ran away, leaving their gold on the table. So, after a good laugh, Jack and his companions went in and took possession of the house and the gold. Now Jack was a wise boy, and he knew that the robbers would come back in the dead of the night to get their gold. And so, when it came time to go to bed, he put the cat in the rocking chair, and he put the dog under the table, and he put the goat upstairs, and he put the bull in the cellar and bade the rooster fly up on the roof. Then he went to bed. Now sure enough, in the dead of the night, the robbers sent one man back to the house to look after their money. But before long he came back in a great fright and told them a fearsome tale. "I went back to the house," said he, "and went in and tried to sit down in the rocking chair, and there was an old woman knitting there, and she, oh my, stuck her knitting needles into me. That was a cat, you know. Then I went to the table to look after the money, but there was a shoemaker under the table, and my, how he stuck his awl into me. That was a duck, you know. So I started to go upstairs, but there was a man up there threshing, and goody, how he knocked me down with his flail. That was a goat, you know. Then I started to go down to the cellar, but oh dear me, there was a man down there chopping wood, and he knocked me up, and he knocked me down, just terrible with his axe. That was the brawl, you know. But I shouldn't have minded all that if it hadn't been for an awful little fellow on the top of the house by the kitchen chimney, who kept a hollering and hollering, 'Cook him in a stew, cook him in a stew, cook him in a stew.' And that, of course, was a cock-a-doodle-doo. Then the robbers agreed that they would rather lose their gold than meet with such a fate. So they made off, and Jack next morning went gaily home with his booty, and each of the animals carried a portion of it. The cat hung a bag on its tail. A cat when it walks always carries its tail stuffed. A dog on his collar, the goat and the bull on their horns. But Jack made the rooster carry a golden guinea in its beak to prevent it from calling all the time, 'Cock-a-doodle-doo, cook him in a stew.' The end of How Jack Went Out to Seek His Fortune by Arthur Rackham, retold by Flora Annie Steele, read by Shahd.
The Ladly Worm of Spindleston, Heugh, edited by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Ladly Worm of Spindleston, Heugh. In Bamborough Castle once lived a king who had a fair wife and 2 children, a son named Childe Wynd and a daughter named Margaret. Childe Wynd went forth to seek his fortune, and soon after he had gone, the queen his mother died. The king mourned her long and faithfully, but one day while he was hunting he came across a lady of great beauty, and fell so much in love with her that he determined to marry her. So he sent word home that he was going to bring a new queen to Bamborough Castle. Princess Margaret was not very glad to hear of her mother's place being taken, but she did not repine, but did her father's bidding, and at the appointed day came down to the castle gate with the keys all ready to hand over to her stepmother. Soon the procession drew near, and the new queen came towards Princess Margaret, who bowed low and handed her the keys of the castle. She stood there with blushing cheeks and eye on ground, and said, "Oh, welcome, father dear, to your halls and bowers, and welcome to you, my new mother, for all that's here is yours." And again she offered the keys. One of the king's knights who had escorted the new queen cried out in admiration, "Surely this northern princess is the loveliest of her kind." At that the new queen flushed up and cried out, "At least your courtesy might have accepted me." And then she muttered below her breath, "I'll soon put an end to her beauty." That same night the queen, who was a noted witch, stole down to a lonely dungeon wherein she did her magic, and with spells 3 times 3 and with passes 9 times 9 she cast Princess Margaret under her spell. And this was her spell: "I weird ye to be a ladly worm, and borrowed shall ye never be, until Childe Wynd, the king's own son, come to the Heugh and thrice kiss thee. Until the world comes to an end, borrowed shall ye never be." So Lady Margaret went to bed a beauteous maiden, and rose up a ladly worm. And when her maidens came in to dress her in the morning, they found coiled up on the bed a dreadful dragon, which uncoiled itself and came towards them. But they ran away shrieking, and the ladly worm crawled and crept and crept and crawled, till it reached the Heugh, or rock of the Spindlestone, round which it coiled itself, and lay there basking with its terrible snout in the air. Soon the country round about had reason to know of the ladly worm of Spindleston Heugh, for hunger drove the monster out from its cave and it used to devour everything it could come across. So at last they went to a mighty warlock and asked him what they should do. Then he consulted his works and his familiar and told them, "The Laidly Worm is really the Princess Margaret, and it is hunger that drives her forth to do such deeds. Put aside for her 7 kine, and each day as the sun goes down, carry every drop of milk they yield to the stone trough at the foot of the Heugh, and the Laidly Worm will trouble the country no longer. But if you would that she be borrowed to her natural shape, and that she who bespelled her be rightly punished, send over the seas for her brother, the child Wind." All was done as the warlock advised. The Laidly Worm lived on the milk of the 7 kine, and the country was troubled no longer. But when Child Wind heard the news, he swore a mighty oath to rescue his sister and revenge her on her cruel stepmother. And 33 of his men took the oath with him. Then they set to work and built a long ship, and its keel they made of the rowan tree. And when all was ready, they out with their oars and pulled cheer for Bamborough Keep. But as they got near the keep, the stepmother felt by her magic power that something was being wrought against her. So she summoned her familiar imps and said, "Child Wind is coming over the seas, he must never land. Raise storms or bore the hull, but nohow must he touch shore." Then the imps went forth to meet Child Wind's ship, but when they got near, they found they had no power over the ship, for its keel was made of the rowan tree. So back they came to the Queen Witch, who knew not what to do. She ordered her men-at-arms to resist Child Wind if he should land near them, and by her spell she caused the Laidly Worm to wait by the entrance of the harbour. As the ship came near, the worm unfolded its coils, and dipping into the sea, caught hold of the ship of Child Wind and banged it off the shore. 3 times Child Wind urged his men on to row bravely and strong, but each time the Laidly Worm kept it off the shore. Then Child Wind ordered the ship to be put about, and the Witch Queen thought he had given up the attempt. But instead of that, he only rounded the next point, and landed safe and sound in Buttle Creek, and then, with sword drawn and bow bent, rushed up, followed by his men, to fight the terrible worm that had kept them from landing. But the moment Child Wind had landed, the Witch Queen's power over the Laidly Worm had gone, and she went back to her bower all alone, not an imp nor a man-at-arms to help her, for she knew her hour was come. So when Child Wind came rushing up to the Laidly Worm, it made no attempt to stop him or hurt him. But just as he was going to raise his sword to slay it, the voice of his own sister Margaret came from its jaws, saying, "Oh, quit your sword, and bend your bow, and give me kisses 3, for though I am a poisonous worm, no harm I'll do to thee." Child Wind stayed his hand, but he did not know what to think if some witchery were not in it. Then said the Laidly Worm again, "Oh, quit your sword, and bend your bow, and give me kisses 3. If I'm not one ere set of sun, one never shall I be." Then Child Wind went up to the Laidly Worm and kissed it once, but no change came over it. Then Child Wind kissed it once more, but yet no change came over it. For a 3rd time he kissed the loathsome thing, and with a hiss and a roar the Laidly Worm reared back, and before Child Wind stood his sister Margaret. He wrapped his cloak about her, and then went up to the castle with her. When he reached the keep, he went off to the Witch Queen's bower, and when he saw her, he touched her with a twig of a rowan tree. No sooner had he touched her than she shriveled up and shriveled up, till she became a huge ugly toad, with bold staring eyes and a horrible hiss. She croaked and she hissed, and then hopped away down the castle steps, and Child Wind took his father's place as king, and they all lived happy afterwards. But to this day, a loathsome toad is seen at times haunting the neighborhood of Bamborough Keep, and the wicked Witch Queen is that Laidly Toad. End of The Laidly Worm. This recording is in the public domain.
The Land of Laughter by Angelina W. Gremke. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Land of Laughter by Angelina W. Gremke. Recorded by Mary Patterson. Once upon a time there were 2 little boys, and they were all alone in the world. They lived with a cruel old man and old woman, who made them work hard, very hard, all day, and beat them when they did not move fast enough, and always, every night before they went to bed. They slept in an attic on a rickety, narrow bed that went screech, screech whenever they moved. And in the summer, they nearly died with the heat up there. and in the winter with the cold. One wintry night, when they were both weeping very bitterly after a particular hard beating, they suddenly heard a pleasant voice saying, "Why are you crying, little boys?" They looked up, and there in the moonlight by their bed was the dearest little old lady. She was dressed all in gray, from the peak of her little pointed hat to her little buckled shoes. She held a black cane much taller than her little self. Her hair fell about her ears in tiny gray corkscrew curls, and they bobbled about as she moved. Her eyes were black and bright as, well, as that lovely white light in the fire, and her cheeks were as red as an apple. "Why are you crying, little boys?" she asked again in a lovely, low little voice. "Because we are tired and sore and hungry and cold, and we're all alone in the world, and we don't know how to laugh any more. We should so like to laugh again." "Why, that's easy," she said. "It's just like this." And she laughed a little joyous musical laugh. "Try," she commanded. They tried, but their laughing boxes were very rusty, and they made horrid sounds. "Well," she said, "I advise you to pack up and go away as soon as you can to the land of laughter. You'll soon learn there, I can tell you." "Is there such a land?" they asked doubtfully. "To be sure there is," she answered, the least bit sharply. "We never heard of it," they said. "Well, I'm sure there must be plenty of things you never heard about," she said just the leastest bit more sharply. "In a moment, you'll be telling me the flowers don't talk together, and the birds." "We never heard of such things," they said in surprise, their eyes like saucers. "There," she said, bobbing her little curls. "What did I tell you? You have much to learn." "How do you get to the land of laughter?" they asked. "You go out on the eastern gate of town just as the sun is rising, and you take the highway there and follow it. And if you go with it long enough, it will bring you to the gate of the land of laughter. It is a long, long way from here, and it will take you many days." The words had scarcely left her mouth when, lo, the little lady disappeared, and where she had stood was the white square of moonlight, nothing else. And without more ado, these two little boys put their arms around each other and fell fast asleep. And in the gray, just before daybreak, they awoke and dressed, and put on their little ragged caps and mittens, for it was a wintry day. They stole out of the house and made for the eastern gate. Just as they reached it and passed through, the whole east leapt into fire. All day they walked, and many days thereafter. And kindly people, by the way, took them in and gave them food and drink, and sometimes a bed at night. Often they slept by the roadside, but they didn't mind that, for the climate was delightful, not too hot and not too cold. They soon threw away their ragged little mittens. They walked for many days, and there was no land of laughter. Once they met an old man, richly dressed, with shiny jewels on his fingers, and he stopped them and asked, "Where are you going so fast, little boys?" "We are going to the land of laughter," they said very gravely. "That," said the old man, "is a very foolish thing to do. Come with me, and I will take you to the land of riches. I will cover you with beautiful garments and give you jewels and a castle to live in, with servants and horses and many things besides." And they said to him, "No, we wish to learn how to laugh again. We have forgotten how, and we are going to the land of laughter." "You will regret not going with me. See if you don't," he said, and left them in quite a huff. And they walked again many days, and again they met an old man. He was tall and imposing looking and very dignified, and he said, "Where are you going so fast, little boys?" "We are going to the land of laughter," they said very seriously. "What?" he said. "That is an extremely foolish thing to do. Come with me and I'll give you power. I will make you great men, generals, kings, emperors, whatever you desire to accomplish will be permitted you." And they said politely, "Thank you very much, but we have forgotten how to laugh, and we are going there to learn how." He looked upon them haughtily, without speaking, and disappeared. And they walked and walked more days, and they met another old man, and he was clad in rags, and his face was thin, and his eyes were unhappy, and he whispered to them, "Where are you going so fast, little boys?" "We are going to the land of laughter," they answered without a smile. "Laughter? Laughter? That is useless. Come with me, and I will show you the beauty of life through sacrifice, suffering for others. That is the only life I come from, the land of sacrifice." And they thanked him kindly, but said, "We have suffered enough. We have forgotten how to laugh. We would learn again." And they went on, and he looked after them wistfully. They walked more days, and at last they came to the land of laughter. And how do you suppose they knew this? Because they could hear over the wall the sound of joyous laughter, the laughter of men, women, and little children. And one sat guarding the gate, and they went to her. "We have come a long, long distance, and we would enter the land of laughter." "Let me see you smile first," she said gently. "I sit at the gate, and no one who does not know how to smile may enter into the land of laughter." And they tried to smile, but could not. "Go away and practice," she said kindly, "and come back tomorrow." And they went away and practiced all night how to smile. And in the morning they returned, and the gentle lady at the gate said, "Dear little boys, have you learned how to smile?" And they said, "We have tried. How is this?" "Better," she said. "Much better. Practice some more and come back tomorrow." And they went away obediently and practiced. And they came the third day, and she said, "Now try again." And tears of delight came into her lovely eyes. "Those were very beautiful smiles," she said. "Now you may enter." And she unlocked the gate and kissed them both, and they entered the beautiful land of laughter. Never had they seen such blue skies, such green trees and grass. Never had they heard such bird song. And people, men, women, and children, laughing softly, came to meet them and took them in and made them at home. And soon, very soon, they learned to laugh. All day they laughed, and even in their sleep. And they grew up here and married and had laughing, happy children. And sometimes they thought of the land of riches and said, "Ah, well," and sometimes the land of power, and sighed a little, and sometimes the land of sacrifice, and their eyes were wistful. But they soon forgot and laughed again, and they grew old laughing. And when they died, a laugh was on their lips. Thus are things in the beautiful land of laughter. End of The Land of Laughter by Angelina W. Gremke. Recorded by Mary Patterson. This story is in the public domain.
The Little Match Girl by E. Louise Smythe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. It was very cold. The snow fell and it was almost dark. It was the last day of the year. A little match girl was running in the street. Her name was Gretchen. She had no hat on. Her feet were bare. When she left home, she had on some big slippers of her mamma's, but they were so large that she lost them when she ran across the street. Gretchen had a lot of matches in her old apron. She had a little bunch in her hand, but she could not sell her matches. No one would buy them. Poor little Gretchen. She was cold and hungry. The snow fell on her curly hair, but she did not think about that. She saw lights in the houses. She smelled good things cooking. She said to herself, "This is the last night of the year." Gretchen got colder and colder. She was afraid to go home. She knew her papa would whip her if she did not take some money to him. It was as cold at home as in the street. They were too poor to have a fire. They had to put rags in the windows to keep out the wind. Gretchen didn't even have a bed. She had to sleep on a pile of rags. She sat down on a doorstep. Her little hands were almost frozen. She took a match and lighted it to warm her hands. The match looked like a little candle. Gretchen thought she was sitting by a big stove. It was so bright. She put the match near her feet to warm them. Then the light went out. She did not think she was by the stove anymore. Gretchen lighted another match. Now she thought she could look into a room. In this room was a table. A white cloth and pretty dishes were on the table. There was a roast turkey too. It was cooked and ready to eat. The knife and fork were in his back. The turkey jumped from the dish and ran to the little girl. The light went out and she was in the cold and dark again. Gretchen lighted another match. She thought she was sitting by a Christmas tree. Very many candles were on the tree. It was full of pretty things. Gretchen put up her little hands. The light went out. The lights on the Christmas tree went up until she saw they were stars. Then she saw a star fall. "Someone is dying," said little Gretchen. Grandma had been very good to the little girl, but she was dead. The grandma had said, "When a star falls, someone is going to God." The little girl lighted another match. It made a big light. Gretchen thought she saw her grandma. She never looked so pretty before. She looked so sweet and happy. "Oh, Grandma," said the little girl, "take me. When the light goes out, you will go away." The stove and the turkey and the Christmas tree all went away. Then Gretchen lighted a bunch of matches. She wanted to keep her grandma with her. The matches made it very light. The grandma took the little girl in her arms. They went up, up, where they would never be cold or hungry. They were with God. The next day came. Some men found a little girl in the street. She was dead. In her hand were the burned matches. They said, "Poor little thing, she froze to death." They did not know how happy she was in heaven. This was the end of The Little Match Girl by E. Louise Smythe.
The Little Pine Tree by E. Louise Smythe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Andrew Gaunce. The Little Pine Tree. A little pine tree was in the woods. It had no leaves. It had needles. The little tree said, "I do not like needles. All the other trees in the woods have pretty leaves. I want leaves too, but I will have better leaves. I want gold leaves." Night came, and the little tree went to sleep. A fairy came by and gave it gold leaves. When the little tree woke, it had leaves of gold. It said, "Oh, I am so pretty. No other tree has gold leaves." Night came. A man came by with a bag. He saw the gold leaves. He took them all and put them into his bag. The poor little tree cried, "I do not want gold leaves again. I will have glass leaves." So the little tree went to sleep. The fairy came by and put the glass leaves on it. The little tree woke and saw its glass leaves. How pretty they looked in the sunshine. No other tree was so bright. Then a wind came up. It blew and blew. The glass leaves all fell from the tree and were broken. Again the little tree had no leaves. It was very sad and said, "I will not have gold leaves, and I will not have glass leaves. I want green leaves. I want to be like the other trees." And the little tree went to sleep. When it woke, it was like the other trees. It had green leaves. A goat came by. He saw the green leaves on the little tree. The goat was hungry, and he ate all the leaves. Then the little tree said, "I do not want any leaves. I will not have green leaves, nor glass leaves, nor gold leaves. I like my needles best." And the little tree went to sleep. The fairy gave it what it wanted. When it woke, it had its needles again. Then the little pine tree was happy. End of The Little Pine Tree by E. Louise Smythe.
The Sagacious Monkey and the Boar, a Japanese fairy tale. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Long, long ago, there lived in the province of Shinshin, in Japan, a traveling monkey man, who earned his living by taking around a monkey and showing off the animal's tricks. One evening, the man came home in a very bad temper, and told his wife to send for the butcher the next morning. The wife was very bewildered, and asked her husband, "Why do you wish me to send for the butcher?" "It's no use taking that monkey round any longer. He's too old, and forgets his tricks. I beat him with my stick all I know how, but he won't dance properly. I must now sell him to the butcher, and make what money out of him I can. There is nothing else to be done." The woman felt very sorry for the poor little animal, and pleaded for her husband to spare the monkey, but her pleading was all in vain. The man was determined to sell him to the butcher. Now the monkey was in the next room, and overheard every word of the conversation. He soon understood that he was to be killed, and he said to himself, "Barbarous indeed is my master. Here I have served him faithfully for years, and instead of allowing me to end my days comfortably and in peace, he is going to let me be cut up by the butcher, and my poor body is to be roasted and stewed and eaten? Woe is me! What am I to do?" Ah, a bright thought has struck me. There is, I know,
a wild boar living in the forest nearby. I have often heard tell of his wisdom. Perhaps if I go to him and tell him the strait I am in, he will give me his counsel. I will go and try." There was no time to lose. The monkey slipped out of the house and ran as quickly as he could to the forest to find the boar. The boar was at home, and the monkey began his tale of woe at once. "Good Mr. Boar, I have heard of your excellent wisdom. I am in great trouble. You alone can help me. I have grown old in the service of my master, and because I cannot dance properly, now he intends to sell me to the butcher. What do you advise me to do? I know how clever you are." The boar was pleased at the flattery, and determined to help the monkey. He thought for a little while, and then said, "Hasn't your master a baby?" "Oh yes," said the monkey, "he has one infant son." "Doesn't it lie by the door in the morning when your mistress begins the work of the day? Well, I will come round early, and when I see my opportunity, I will seize the child and run off with it." "What then?" said the monkey. "Why, the mother will be in a tremendous scare, and before your master and mistress know what to do, you must run after me and rescue the child and take it home safely to its parents, and you will see that when the butcher comes, they won't have the heart to sell you." The monkey thanked the boar many times, and then went home. He did not sleep much that night, as you may imagine, for thinking of the morrow. His life depended on whether the boar's plan succeeded or not. He was the first up, waiting anxiously for what was to happen. It seemed to him a very long time before his master's wife began to move about and open the shutters to let in the light of the day. Then all happened as the boar planned. The mother placed her child near the porch as usual, while she tidied up the house and got her breakfast ready. The child was crooning happily in the morning sunlight, dabbing on the mats at the play of light and shadow. Suddenly there was a noise in the porch, and a loud cry from the child. The mother ran out from the kitchen to the spot, only just in time to see the boar disappearing through the gate with her child in its clutch. She flung out her hands with a loud cry of despair, and rushed into the inner room, where her husband was still sleeping soundly. He sat up slowly and rubbed his eyes, and crossly demanded what his wife was making all that noise about. By the time that the man was alive to what had happened, and they both got outside the gate, the boar had gone well away. But they saw the monkey running after the thief as hard as his legs would carry him. Both the man and wife were moved to admiration at the plucky conduct of the sagacious monkey, and their gratitude knew no bounds when the faithful monkey brought the child back safely to their arms. "There," said the wife, "this is the animal you want to kill. If the monkey hadn't been here, we should have lost our child forever." "You are right, wife, for once," said the man as he carried the child into the house. "You may send the butcher back when he comes, and now give us all a good breakfast, and the monkey too." When the butcher arrived, he was sent away with an order for some boar's meat for the evening dinner, and the monkey was petted and lived the rest of his days in peace, nor did his master ever strike him again. End of The Sagacious Monkey and the Boar, a Japanese fairy tale.
The Six Swans, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Six Swans. A king was once hunting in a great wood, and he hunted the game so eagerly that none of his courtiers could follow him. When evening came on, he stood still and looked around him, and he saw that he had quite lost himself. He sought a way out, but could find none. Then he saw an old woman with a shaking head coming towards him, but she was a witch. "Good woman," he said to her, "can you not show me the way out of the wood?" "Oh, certainly, Sir King," she replied. "I can quite well do that, but on one condition, which if you do not fulfill, you will never get out of the wood, and will die of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is so beautiful that she has not her equal in the world, and is well fitted to be your wife. If you will make her Lady Queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." The king in his anguish of mind consented, and the old woman led him to her little house where her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king as if she were expecting him, and he saw that she was certainly very beautiful, but that did not please him, and he could not look at her without a secret feeling of horror. As soon as he had lifted the maiden onto his horse, the old woman showed him the way, and the king reached his palace, where the wedding was celebrated. The king had already been married once, and had by his first wife 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, whom he loved more than anything in the world. And now, because he was afraid that their stepmother might not treat them well and might do them harm, he put them in a lonely castle that stood in the middle of a wood. It lay so hidden, and the way to it was so hard to find, that he himself could not have found it out had not a wise woman given him a reel of thread which possessed a marvelous property. When he threw it before him, it unwound itself and showed him the way. But the king went so often to his dear children that the queen was offended at his absence. She grew curious, and wanted to know what he had to do quite alone in the wood. She gave his servants a great deal of money, and they betrayed the secret to her, and also told her of the reel which alone could point out the way. She had no rest now till she had found out where the king guarded the reel, and then she made some little white shirts, and, as she had learned from her witch mother, sewed an enchantment in each of them. And when the king had ridden off, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the reel showed her the way. The children, who saw someone coming in the distance, thought it was their dear father coming to them, and sprang to meet him very joyfully. Then she threw over each one a little shirt, which when it had touched their bodies changed them into swans, and they flew away over the forest. The queen went home quite satisfied, and thought she had got rid of her stepchildren, but the girl had not run to meet her with her brothers, and she knew nothing of her. The next day the king came to visit his children, but he found no one but the girl. "Where are your brothers?" asked the king. "Alas, dear father," she answered, "they have gone away and left me all alone." And she told him that looking out of her little window she had seen her brothers flying over the wood in the shape of swans, and she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the yard, and which she had collected. The king mourned, but he did not think that the queen had done the wicked deed, and as he was afraid the maiden would also be taken from him, he wanted to take her with him. But she was afraid of her stepmother, and begged the king to let her stay just one night more in the castle in the wood. The poor maiden thought, "My home is no longer here. I will go and seek my brothers." And when night came she fled away into the forest. She ran all through the night and the next day, till she could go no further for weariness. Then she saw a little hut, went in, and found a room with 6 little beds. She was afraid to lie down on one, so she crept under one of them, lay on the hard floor, and was going to spend the night. But when the sun had set she heard a noise, and saw 6 swans flying in at the window. They stood on the floor and blew at one another, and blew all their feathers off, and their swanskin came off like a shirt. Then the maiden recognized her brothers, and overjoyed she crept out from under the bed. Her brothers were not less delighted than she to see their little sister again, but their joy did not last long. "You cannot stay here," they said to her. "This is a den of robbers. If they were to come here and find you, they would kill you. Could you not protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they answered, "for we can only lay aside our swanskins for a quarter of an hour every evening. For this time we regain our human forms, but then we are changed into swans again." Then the little sister cried and said, "Can you not be freed?" "Oh no," they said, "the conditions are too hard. You must not speak or laugh for 6 years, and must make in that time 6 shirts for us out of starflowers. If a single word comes out of your mouth, all your labor is in vain." And when the brothers had said this, the quarter of an hour came to an end, and they flew away out of the window as swans. But the maiden had determined to free her brothers, even if it should cost her her life. She left the hut, went into the forest, climbed a tree, and spent the night there. The next morning she went out, collected starflowers, and began to sew. She could speak to no one, and she had no wish to laugh, so she sat there looking only at her work. When she had lived there some time, it happened that the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and his hunters came to the tree on which the maiden sat. They called to her and said, "Who are you?" But she gave no answer. "Come down to us," they said. "We will do you no harm." But she shook her head silently. As they pressed her further with questions, she threw them the golden chain from her neck. But they did not leave off, and she threw them her girdle, and when this was no use, her garters, and then her dress. The huntsman would not leave her alone, but climbed the tree, lifted the maiden down, and led her to the king. The king asked, "Who are you? What are you doing up that tree?" But she answered nothing. He asked her in all the languages he knew, but she remained as dumb as a fish. Because she was so beautiful, however, the king's heart was touched, and he was seized with a great love for her. He wrapped her up in his cloak, placed her before him on his horse, and brought her to his castle. There he had her dressed in rich clothes, and her beauty shone out as bright as day, but not a word could be drawn from her. He set her at table by his side, and her modest ways and behavior pleased him so much that he said, "I will marry this maiden and none other in the world." And after some days he married her. But the king had a wicked mother who was displeased with the marriage, and said wicked things of the young queen. "Who knows who this girl is?" she said. "She cannot speak, and is not worthy of a king." After a year, when the queen had her first child, the old mother took it away from her. Then she went to the king and said that the queen had killed it. The king would not believe it, and would not allow any harm to be done her. But she sat quietly sewing at the shirts and troubling herself about nothing. The next time she had a child, the wicked mother did the same thing, but the king could not make up his mind to believe her. He said, "She is too sweet and good to do such a thing as that. If she were not dumb and could defend herself, her innocence would be proved." But when the third child was taken away, and the queen was again accused, and could not utter a word in her own defense, the king was obliged to give her over to the law, which decreed that she must be burnt to death. When the day came on which the sentence was to be executed, it was the last day of the 6 years in which she must not speak or laugh, and now she had freed her dear brothers from the power of the enchantment. The 6 shirts were done, there was only the left sleeve wanting to the last. When she was led to the stake, she laid the shirts on her arm, and as she stood on the pile and the fire was about to be lighted, she looked around her and saw 6 swans flying through the air. Then she knew that her release was at hand, and her heart danced for joy. The swans fluttered around her and hovered low so that she could throw the shirts over them. When they had touched them, the swanskins fell off, and her brothers stood before her, living, well and beautiful. Only the youngest had a swan's wing instead of his left arm. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen went to the king, who was standing by in great astonishment, and began to speak to him, saying, "Dearest husband, now I can speak and tell you openly that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." She told him of the old woman's deceit, and how she had taken the 3 children away and hidden them. Then they were fetched, to the great joy of the king, and the wicked mother came to no good end. But the king and queen with their 6 brothers lived many years in happiness and peace. End of The 6 Swans.
The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Andrew Gaunce. The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean. In a village dwelt a poor old woman who had gathered together a dish of beans and wanted to cook them. So she made a fire on her hearth, and that it might burn the quicker, she lighted it with a handful of straw. When she was emptying the beans into the pan, one dropped without her observing it, and lay on the ground beside a straw, and soon afterwards a burning coal from the fire leapt down to the 2. The straw began, and said, "Dear friends, from whence do you come here?" The coal replied, "I fortunately sprang out of the fire, and if I had not escaped by sheer force, my death would have been certain. I should have been burnt to ashes." The bean said, "I too have escaped with a whole skin, but if the old woman had got me into the pan, I should have been made into broth without any mercy like my comrades." "And would a better fate have fallen to my lot?" said the straw. "The old woman has destroyed all my brethren in fire and smoke. She seized 60 of them at once and took their lives. I luckily slipped through her fingers." "But what are we to do now?" said the coal. "I think," answered the bean, "that as we have so fortunately escaped death, we should keep together like good companions, and lest a new mischance should overtake us here, we should go away together and repair to a foreign country." The proposition pleased the 2 others, and they set out on their way together. Soon, however, they came to a little brook, and as there was no bridge or foot-plank, they did not know how they were to get over it. The straw hit on a good idea, and said, "I will lay myself straight across, and then you can walk over on me as on a bridge." The straw therefore stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, who was of an impetuous disposition, tripped quite boldly onto the newly built bridge. But when she had reached the middle, and heard the water rushing beneath her, she was, after all, afraid, and stood still and ventured no farther. The straw, however, began to burn, broke in 2 pieces, and fell into the stream. The coal slipped after her, hissed when she got into the water, and breathed her last. The bean, who had prudently stayed behind on the shore, could not but laugh at the event, was unable to stop, and laughed so heartily that she burst. It would have been all over with her likewise, if, by good fortune, a tailor who was travelling in search of work had not sat down to rest by the brook. As he had a compassionate heart, he pulled out his needle and thread and sewed her together. The bean thanked him most prettily, but as the tailor used black thread, all beans since then have a black seam. End of The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean.
The Queen of Lanternland by Henry Beston. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time, the youngest son of a king became filled with the desire to go abroad and see the world. He got his father's permission to depart, kissed his parents goodbye, mounted his black horse, and galloped away down the high road. Soon the grey towers of the old castle in which he was born hid themselves behind him. The prince journeyed on, spending the days in travelling and the nights in little wayside inns, till one day he found himself in the heart of the Adamant Mountains. The great red granite crags of the surrounding peaks rose out of the gleaming snow like ugly fingers, and the slopes of giant glaciers sparkled in the sun like torrents of diamonds. The prince sat down by some stunted trees whose tops had long before been broken off by an avalanche, and began to eat the bit of bread and cheese which he had stored in his pocket. His black horse, meanwhile, ate the grass which grew here and there along the mountain path. And as the prince sat there in the bright sun and the silence of the mountains, he became aware of a low, continuous roaring. "There must be a waterfall nearby," said the prince to himself. "I'll go and see it." So, casting another look at his steed, who was contentedly browsing, the prince climbed up the mountainside in the direction of the sound. The prince climbed and climbed, he went in this direction and in that, yet the sound never grew any louder or fainter. Suddenly, he realised that he was hopelessly lost. The little path up which he had ridden had vanished completely, and he had not the slightest idea in which direction it lay. He called aloud, but only the mountain echoes answered mockingly. Night came, and the prince took shelter behind a great rock. All the next day he laboured to find the path, but in vain. He grew very hungry and cold. Every once in a while he would hear the roaring of the waterfall, which seemed to have grown louder. Another day dawned, and another day again. The prince was getting very weak. He knew that he was approaching the mysterious cataract, for the noise of the water was now tremendous, and heaven and earth were full of its roar. The third night came, and the full moon rose solemnly over the snow-clad summits of the lonely and mysterious mountains. Suddenly, the prince, walking blindly on, staggered through a narrow passageway between two splintered crags, and found himself face to face with the mystery. He stood on the snowy floor of a vast amphitheatre whose walls were the steep sides of the giant mountains. Farthest away from him, and opposite the moon, the wall of the bowl appeared as a giant black precipice, whose top seemed to reach almost to the moon-dimmed stars. And over this precipice, a broad river was endlessly pouring, shining in the night like the overflow of an ocean of mountain silver. Though now very weak from lack of food, and dizzy with the roaring of the cataract, the prince made his way to the shore of the foaming and eddying lake into which the water was falling. Great was his surprise to discover that the overflow of this lake disappeared into the earth through a long, low opening in the cliff behind the fall. Greater still was his surprise to see a strange, many-coloured light burning within the cave. The prince made his way toward the light, along a narrow beach of white sand lying between the wall of the cavern and the racing waters of the mysterious river, and found that the glow came from a magnificent lantern studded with emeralds, topazes, amethysts, and rubies, which hung by a chain from the roof of the grotto. Directly under this lantern, drawn up on the sand, lay a little boat with a lantern fastened to the bow. The prince pushed the boat into the river and got into it, and the swift current seized him and hurried him away. At first the cavern grew higher and wider, then it shrank again, and the boat, borne along with incredible speed, shot down a rocky passageway into the very heart of the earth. The passageway broadened once more, and the boat rode gently through monstrous caves whose roofs were upheld by twisted columns taller than the tallest tree. There were times when all was so still that the prince could easily have imagined himself back in the solitude of the mountains. There were times when the foaming and roaring of the underground river grew so deafening that the prince feared lest he might be approaching the brink of a subterranean cataract. Many hours passed. The prince did not know whether it was night or day. At length, while the boat was gliding through a vast hall, he fell asleep. When he awoke, he found that the boat was floating on the black, glassy surface of an immense underground ocean. All signs of the cavern had disappeared. Far away, over the edge of this ocean, a strange, beautiful glow mounted into the starless sky of the underworld. And while the prince was gazing at the glow, the boat swung into a new current and was borne swiftly toward the light. In a short time, the light grew so wide and bright that one would have believed that a strange golden sun had risen. The boat passed between two giant marble pillars supporting enormous crystal globes filled with a golden fire, and the prince found himself in the harbour of Lantern Land. A city lay before him, a strange golden city edging the shore of a vast semicircular bay. Because in the centre of the earth there is neither sun nor moon, the people have to be continually burning lights, and so many and so great were the lanterns of Lantern Land that the town was as bright as day. The edge of the harbour was marked with a row of golden lanterns. There were immense lanterns at every 6 paces along the streets. A lantern hung from every house, and the church towers, instead of having bells in them, had great golden lamps which illuminated everything for some distance about. Moreover, every inhabitant of Lantern Land carried a lantern with him wherever he went, the rich carrying golden lanterns set with transparent precious stones, the poor carrying lights of ordinary glass. Soon the prince saw a magnificent ship coming out to meet him. The prow was carved in the shape of a dragon's head, and a beautiful lantern hung from its jaws. Overcome by hunger and fatigue, the poor prince fell insensible to the floor of his little boat. When he came to his senses again, he was lying between sheets of the whitest, most delicate linen in a great 4-poster bed, in a room in the royal palace. Thanks to his kind hosts, the prince soon recovered his strength. When he was completely himself again, he was summoned to an audience with the Queen of Lantern Land. The Queen, a very beautiful young woman, wearing a wonderful lantern crown, sat on an ebony throne. On each side of the throne stood a tall soldier, clad in scarlet and holding a long ebony staff surmounted by a round lantern lit by a golden flame. The prince dropped on his knee and thanked the Queen for her kindness and hospitality. "You are the first stranger to come to Lantern Land for 1,000 years, said the young Queen. "If it is not asking too much from a guest, pray, how did you happen to find the river of the underworld?" So the prince told her that he was a king's son, and described his adventures in the mountains. You may be sure that the Queen was glad to hear of his royal birth, for she had fallen in love with him at first sight. A month passed. The prince remained a guest in the palace. All kinds of festivities were given in his honour. There were wonderful dances, masquerades, picnics, and theatricals going on all the time. One day, the prince and the Queen, accompanied by a little group of courtiers, rode to the frontier of Lantern Land. The lovers galloped ahead of the party and reached a little hill beyond which there were no more lanterns. Ahead of them, the rolling land, sweeping farther and farther away from the light, grew darker and darker till it finally plunged into the eternal night of the underworld. The prince looked at the Queen and saw that she was weeping. "Dear love, why do you weep?" asked the prince, who felt sad to see tears in his lady's lovely eyes. "I weep to think that in spite of our love, we must soon part forever," said the Queen. "Part forever? Dear lady, what can you mean?" said the anxious prince. "A cruel fate hangs over us," replied the lady. "Know, dear prince, that I am promised in marriage to the enchanter Dragondel, and that in exactly 8 days he will come here to claim my hand. "The enchanter Dragondale? Who is he?" said the prince. "Alas," said the queen, "the enchanter Dragondale is the most powerful magician of all the underworld. He is about 8 feet tall, has cruel sunken eyes that burn like dull fires, and dresses entirely in black. We met at a ball given by the king of the goblins. Dragondale pursued me with compliments. A few days afterwards, an iron boat arrived in the port of Lanternland, having on board a giant blue dog who is Dragondale's younger brother. This terrible animal, from whose sight the people of Lanternland fled screaming, made his way to the palace and dropped at my feet a jewelled casket, which he carried between his jaws. The casket contained Dragondale's request from my hand, and added that, were I to refuse him, he would let loose a legion of ghosts and other winged spirits against the lanterns of Lanternland. I had a vision of Lanternland in darkness, of my poor subjects dying of fear and starvation. Rather than let this vision come true, I accepted the enchanter. Soon I shall never see you again, for Dragondale will come and take me to his awful castle, which lies on an island in the dark ocean. Nor will you ever be able to save me, for Dragondale has so bewitched the waves that a terrible whirlpool forms on the sea when a boat approaches the enchanted castle and engulfs it. But I can fight Dragondale, said the prince, like the brave youth that he was. That would be of little use, replied the queen, for you would be changed into a stone the instant you cross swords with him. Tomorrow the blue dog arrives to remind me of my obligation and to carry back to the island some of the palace servants who are to make Dragondale's castle ready for my coming. The other members of the party now rode up, and the queen dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief and pretended not to have been crying. The prince and the queen felt very unhappy as they rode home. On the next day, sure enough, the iron boat arrived, and the blue dog, who was as large as a lion, went to the queen's palace and bade her make ready for the coming wedding. A dozen of the queen's servants were then ordered to go with the blue dog to Dragondale's castle. Among these servants, disguised as a kitchen lad, was the prince, for he had determined to see if there was not some way in which the young queen could be rescued from the wicked magician. The boat neared the island, but no terrible whirlpool formed in the enchanted sea. At last the boat reached Dragondale's castle. It stood on the top of a high, lonely rock against whose steep sides the waves of the underground ocean were forever foaming and breaking, and it was half in ruins and was very poorly lighted. The prince took his place in the kitchen and sought for an opportunity to prevent the marriage of Dragondale and the queen. For 4 days of the precious week, however, the poor prince was kept so busy baking and making pastries for the coming of the bride that he did not have an instant to ask questions or do anything else. In the morning hours of the 5th day, there was a terrible moaning and roaring outside, and the cooks rushed to the kitchen windows. An unhappy fishing boat had been swept by the wind too near Dragondale's castle. The enchanted whirlpool had formed and caught the boat in its awful circle. Now it went slowly round the outer edge, now, going faster and faster, it slid down the side of the awful funnel, and finally it vanished. An instant later, the whirlpool had disappeared, leaving the sea roaring and foaming. The prince shuddered. "Well, you may shudder," said the chief cook, "for such would have been your fate if our master's brother had not carried with him the talisman which rules the whirlpool." "Talisman? What talisman?" said the prince, affecting stupidity. "Why, the little golden hand, you fool," said the chief cook. "My, it must be a great big hand to be able to quiet that whirlpool," said the prince. "Big indeed, you ninny," growled the cook. "Why, the magic hand is only as big as a baby's hand. I've seen it many times. The master carries it in his pocket and puts it under his pillow while he sleeps." So later on, when his work was done and everybody had gone to bed, the prince, in the hope of stealing the talisman, tried to make his way to Dragondale's bedchamber. But when he reached the foot of the stairs which led to the enchanter's room, he found it guarded by 2 black panthers, which stared at him with insolent yellow eyes and switched their long tails. The prince went outdoors to see if there was any hope of climbing to the room along the outer wall, and found that the windows of Dragondale's chamber overlooked a cliff falling thousands of feet sheer to the dark sea. Far, far away, the prince saw the glow of Lanternland. Only a short time remained to him in which to save his beloved lady of the lanterns. As he wandered about, very sick at heart, he saw a little black cat running madly back and forth along the edge of a steep cliff, from one of whose crevices came a persistent, unhappy mewing. The poor cat was a mother cat, and was trying to rescue a kitten of hers that had fallen down between the rocks. At the great risk of being dashed to pieces himself, the brave prince climbed down the precipice, rescued the kitten, and gave it back to its anxious mother. "Thank you, brave youth," said the old cat. "May it some day be within my power to help you as you have helped me." "You can help me this very moment," said the prince. And he told the cat who he was, why he had come to the castle, and of his desires to get possession of the talisman. "I will help you get the talisman," said the cat. "The panthers will let me pass, for they are cousins of mine. But you must make another little golden hand to take the place of the one I shall steal, for if Dragondale misses the golden hand, he will summon his demons to find it, and we shall both lose our lives. Go now to the kitchen, carve a small hand with the fingers close together and the thumb lying close to the fingers. Gild it over with the gold dust you have had given you for the pastry icings, and bring it to me tomorrow night at this very hour." So the prince worked the rest of the night carving and gilding the little golden hand, and on the next night he gave it to the cat. The cat took it in her mouth, as she would have a mouse, walked coolly by the panthers, and entered Dragondale's room. She had just succeeded in getting the true hand out from under the magician's pillow when Dragondale woke up. The cat was clever enough to pretend to be engaged in a mouse hunt, so the enchanter paid no attention to her and fell asleep once more. When the cat, however, got under Dragondale's couch again, the two hands lay side by side, and she could not remember just which one was the talisman and which one the false hand. So, because she had to act quickly, she put one of the hands under the pillow, brought the other to the prince, and told him her story. But so well matched were the little hands, that even the prince was far from certain that he had not got his own hand back again. And now came the 7th day, the day on which Dragondale, the blue dog, and all the wicked enchanter's friends were to sail to Lanternland for the marriage ceremony. The iron ship, made gay with 1,000 small scarlet lanterns, stood ready to carry them over. The enchanter and his company got in, and the vessel left the island. The prince stood watching the ship from the top of the cliffs. What anxiety was in his heart! If Dragondale still possessed the true talisman, he would cross the whirlpool safely and marry the beautiful Queen of Lanternland. The vessel sped on. It was now at some distance from the island. "All is lost," thought the prince with a sinking heart. "Dragondale has the true talisman," and in his bitterness he was about to throw the little golden hand which lay in his pocket down into the sea. Suddenly, the air became filled with a terrible moaning, the sea became troubled, the whirlpool awoke, and the prince saw the red lights of the enchanter's ship whirled round and round, faster and faster, till they disappeared forever in the waters of the sunless sea. As for the prince, he soon found another boat, and taking with him the talisman, his fellow servants, and the black cat and her kittens, he returned to Lanternland, married the queen, and lived happily ever after. End of The Queen of Lanternland by Henry Beston. Read by Elizabeth Rayner.
The Three Dogs by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Edited by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Andrew Gaunce. The Three Dogs. There was once upon a time a shepherd who had 2 children, a son and a daughter. When he was on his deathbed, he turned to them and said, "I have nothing to leave you but 3 sheep and a small house. Divide them between you as you like, but don't quarrel over them, whatever you do." When the shepherd was dead, the brother asked his sister which she would like best, the sheep or the little house. And when she had chosen the house, he said, "Then I'll take the sheep and go out and seek my fortune in the wide world. I don't see why I shouldn't be as lucky as many another who has set out on the same search, and it wasn't for nothing that I was born on a Sunday." And so he started on his travels, driving his 3 sheep in front of him, and for a long time it seemed as if fortune didn't mean to favor him at all. One day he was sitting disconsolately at a crossroad, when a man suddenly appeared before him with 3 black dogs, each one bigger than the other. "Hullo, my fine fellow," said the man. "I see you have 3 fat sheep. I'll tell you what, if you'll give them to me, I'll give you my 3 dogs." In spite of his sadness, the youth smiled and replied, "What would I do with your dogs? My sheep at least feed themselves, but I should have to find food for the dogs." "My dogs are not like other dogs," said the stranger. "They will feed you instead of you them, and will make your fortune. The smallest one is called Salt, and will bring you food whenever you wish. The second is called Pepper, and will tear anyone to pieces who offers to hurt you. And the great big strong one is called Mustard, and is so powerful that it will break iron or steel with its teeth." The shepherd at last let himself be persuaded, and gave the stranger his sheep. In order to test the truth of his statement about the dogs, he said at once, "Salt, I am hungry," and before the words were out of his mouth, the dog had disappeared, and returned in a few minutes with a large basket full of the most delicious food. Then the youth congratulated himself on the bargain he had made, and continued his journey in the best of spirits. One day he met a carriage and pair, all draped in black. Even the horses were covered with black trappings, and the coachman was clothed in crape from top to toe. Inside the carriage sat a beautiful girl in a black dress, crying bitterly. The horses advanced slowly and mournfully, with their heads bent on the ground. "Coachman, what's the meaning of all this grief?" asked the shepherd. At first the coachman wouldn't say anything, but when the youth pressed him, he told him that a huge dragon dwelt in the neighborhood, and required the yearly sacrifice of a beautiful maiden. This year the lot had fallen on the king's daughter, and the whole country was filled with woe and lamentation in consequence. The shepherd felt very sorry for the lovely maiden, and determined to follow the carriage. In a little it halted at the foot of a high mountain. The girl got out and walked slowly and sadly to meet her terrible fate. The coachman perceived that the shepherd wished to follow her, and warned him not to do so if he valued his life. But the shepherd wouldn't listen to his advice. When they had climbed about halfway up the hill, they saw a terrible-looking monster with the body of a snake, and with huge wings and claws coming towards them, breathing forth flames of fire, and preparing to seize its victim. Then the shepherd called, "Pepper, come to the rescue!" and the second dog set upon the dragon, and after a fierce struggle bit it so sharply in the neck that the monster rolled over, and in a few moments breathed its last. Then the dog ate up the body, all except its 2 front teeth, which the shepherd picked up and put in his pocket. The princess was quite overcome with terror and joy, and fell fainting at the feet of her deliverer. When she recovered her consciousness, she begged the shepherd to return with her to her father, who would reward him richly. But the youth answered that he wanted to see something of the world, and that he would return again in 3 years, and nothing would make him change this resolve. The princess seated herself once more in her carriage, and, bidding each other farewell, she and the shepherd separated, she to return home, and he to see the world. But while the princess was driving over a bridge, the carriage suddenly stood still, and the coachman turned round to her and said, "Your deliverer has gone, and doesn't thank you for your gratitude. It would be nice of you to make a poor fellow happy. Therefore you may tell your father that it was I who slew the dragon, and if you refuse to, I will throw you into the river, and no one will be any the wiser, for they will think the dragon has devoured you." The maiden was in a dreadful state when she heard these words, but there was nothing for her to do but swear that she would give out the coachman as her deliverer, and not to divulge the secret to anyone. So they returned to the capital, and everyone was delighted when they saw the princess had returned unharmed. The black flags were taken down from all the palace towers, and gay-colored ones put up in their place, and the king embraced his daughter and her supposed rescuer with tears of joy, and turning to the coachman, he said, "You have not only saved the life of my child, but you have also freed the country from a terrible scourge. Therefore it is only fitting that you should be richly rewarded. Therefore take my daughter for your wife, but, as she is still so young, do not let the marriage be celebrated for another year." The coachman thanked the king for his graciousness, and was then led away to be richly dressed and instructed in all the arts and graces that befitted his new position. But the poor princess wept bitterly, though she did not dare to confide her grief to anyone. When the year was over, she begged so hard for another year's respite that it was granted to her. But this year passed also, and she threw herself at her father's feet, and begged so piteously for one more year that the king's heart was melted, and he yielded to her request, much to the princess's joy, for she knew that her real deliverer would appear at the end of the 3rd year. And so the year passed away like the other 2, and the wedding day was fixed, and all the people were prepared to feast and make merry. But on the wedding day it happened that a stranger came to the town with 3 black dogs. He asked what the meaning of all the feasting and fuss was, and they told him that the king's daughter was just going to be married to the man who had slain the terrible dragon. The stranger at once denounced the coachman as a liar, but no one would listen to him, and he was seized and thrown into a cell with iron doors. While he was laying on his straw pallet, pondering mournfully on his fate, he thought he heard the low whining of his dogs outside. Then an idea dawned on him, and he called out as loudly as he could, "Mustard, come to my help." And in a second he saw the paws of his biggest dog at the window of his cell, and before he could count 2, the creature had bitten through the iron doors and stood beside him. Then they both let themselves out of the prison by the window, and the poor youth was free once more, though he felt very sad when he thought that another was to enjoy the reward that rightfully belonged to him. He felt hungry, too, so he called his dog Salt and asked him to bring home some food. The faithful creature trotted off, and soon returned with a table napkin full of the most delicious food, and the napkin itself was embroidered with a kingly crown. The king had just seated himself at the wedding feast with all his court, when the dog appeared and licked the princess's hand in an appealing manner. With a joyful start she recognized the beast, and bound her own table napkin round his neck. Then she plucked up her courage and told her father the whole story. The king at once sent a servant to follow the dog, and in a short time the stranger was led into the king's presence. The former coachman grew as white as a sheet when he saw the shepherd, and, falling on his knees, begged for mercy and pardon. The princess recognized her deliverer at once, and did not need the proof of the 2 dragon's teeth which he drew from his pocket. The coachman was thrown into a dark dungeon, and the shepherd took his place at the princess's side, and this time you may be sure she did not beg for the wedding to be put off. The young couple lived for some time in great peace and happiness, when suddenly the former shepherd bethought himself of his poor sister, and expressed a wish to see her again, and to let her share in his good fortune. So they sent a carriage to fetch her, and soon she arrived at the court, and found herself once more in her brother's arms. Then one of the dogs spoke, and said, "Our task is done. You have no more need of us. We only waited to see that you did not forget your sister in your prosperity." And with these words the 3 dogs became 3 birds, and flew away into the heavens. End of The 3 Dogs.
The Wicked Prince by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There lived once upon a time a wicked prince, whose heart and mind were set upon conquering all the countries of the world, and on frightening the people. He devastated their countries with fire and sword, and his soldiers trod down the crops in the fields and destroyed the peasants' huts by fire, so that the flames licked the green leaves off the branches, and the fruit hung dried up on the singed black trees. Many a poor mother fled, her naked baby in her arms, behind the still smoking walls of her cottage, but also there the soldiers followed her, and when they found her, she served as new nourishment to their diabolical enjoyments. Demons could not possibly have done worse things than these soldiers. The prince was of opinion that all this was right, and that it was only the natural course which things ought to take. His power increased day by day, his name was feared by all, and fortune favored his deeds. He brought enormous wealth home from the conquered towns, and gradually accumulated in his residence riches which could nowhere be equaled. He erected magnificent palaces, churches, and halls, and all who saw these splendid buildings and great treasures exclaimed admiringly, "What a mighty prince!" But they did not know what endless misery he had brought upon other countries, nor did they hear the sighs and lamentations which rose up from the debris of the destroyed cities. The prince often looked with delight upon his gold and his magnificent edifices, and thought, like the crowd, "What a mighty prince! But I must have more, much more. No power on earth must equal mine, far less exceed it." He made war with all his neighbors, and defeated them. The conquered kings were chained up with golden fetters to his chariot when he drove through the streets of his city. These kings had to kneel at his and his courtiers' feet when they sat at table, and live on the morsels which they left. At last, the prince had his own statue erected on the public places and fixed on the royal palaces. Nay, he even wished it to be placed in the churches, on the altars. But in this the priests opposed him, saying, "Prince, you are mighty indeed, but God's power is much greater than yours. We dare not obey your orders." "Well," said the prince, "then I will conquer God too." And in his haughtiness and foolish presumption, he ordered a magnificent ship to be constructed, with which he could sail through the air. It was gorgeously fitted out and of many colors. Like the tail of a peacock, it was covered with thousands of eyes, but each eye was the barrel of a gun. The prince sat in the center of the ship and had only to touch a spring in order to make thousands of bullets fly out in all directions, while the guns were at once loaded again. Hundreds of eagles were attached to this ship, and it rose with the swiftness of an arrow up towards the sun. The earth was soon left far below, and looked, with its mountains and woods, like a cornfield where the plough had made furrows which separated green meadows. Soon it looked only like a map with indistinct lines upon it, and at last it entirely disappeared in mist and clouds. Higher and higher rose the eagles up into the air. Then God sent one of his numberless angels against the ship. The wicked prince showered thousands of bullets upon him, but they rebounded from his shining wings and fell down like ordinary hailstones. One drop of blood, one single drop, came out of the white feathers of the angel's wings and fell upon the ship in which the prince sat, burnt into it, and weighed upon it like thousands of hundredweights, dragging it rapidly down to the earth again. The strong wings of the eagles gave way, the wind roared round the prince's head, and the clouds around. Were they formed by the smoke rising up from the burnt cities? Took strange shapes, like crabs many, many miles long, which stretched their claws out after him, and rose up like enormous rocks, from which rolling masses dashed down, and became fire-spitting dragons. The prince was lying half dead in his ship, when it sank at last with a terrible shock into the branches of a large tree in the wood. "I will conquer God," said the prince. "I have sworn it. My will must be done." And he spent 7 years in the construction of wonderful ships to sail through the air, and had darts cast from the hardest steel to break the walls of heaven with. He gathered warriors from all countries, so many that when they were placed side by side they covered the space of several miles. They entered the ships, and the prince was approaching his own, when God sent a swarm of gnats, one swarm of little gnats. They buzzed round the prince and stung his face and hands. Angrily he drew his sword and brandished it, but he only touched the air and did not hit the gnats. Then he ordered his servants to bring costly coverings and wrap him in them, that the gnats might no longer be able to reach him. The servants carried out his orders, but one single gnat had placed itself inside one of the coverings, crept into the prince's ear, and stung him. The place burnt like fire, and the poison entered his blood. Mad with pain, he tore off the coverings and his clothes too, flinging them far away, and danced about before the eyes of his ferocious soldiers, who now mocked at him, the mad prince, who wished to make war with God. and was overcome by a single little gnat. End of The Wicked Prince by Hans Christian Andersen. Recording by Simone Tony.